Hi, I'm Steve Sellers with Omen Comics, and today I want to talk about something that I think is pretty important when we're talking about making comics or thinking about comics, and that's the question of continuity. I was kind of inspired recently on seeing discussions about between writers basically about continuity and whether it should matter more than good storytelling. I look at this as a false choice. I don't think you have to pick one or the other. I think some writers like not to having to worry about continuity because they think that it frees them up to do whatever it is they're doing. Other writers are a little bit more focused in saying, okay, maybe we should make everything coherent and consistent first, and then have the storytelling be the second. I don't take either of those views. I would say that I'm sort of in the middle with this one. For me, I think there needs to be a balance. I think good continuity is part of good storytelling. I don't think you can divorce the two for various reasons. Because really, your real question with that is who do you want to alienate when you're basically asking that question? Do you want to alienate the people that have been reading your comic from the beginning and knows everything about your universe and your characters in every detail? Or do you want to alienate the people that can't get into your comic because everything is incomprehensible and hard to get into, even if the older readers love everything you're doing? Basically, when you're asking that question, you're basically asking who you want to alienate. I don't want to alienate anybody. I want everybody to be able to read and understand our comics, whether that's Blitz or whether that's White Druid and Michael Nero or Guardians of the Lamb. And I work in complex continuities with all the worlds that I build, really. And so for me, I think it's important not just to have continuity and to have layers of history and backstory and things like that, but also to be able to use those things in a way that's accessible and understandable. And I know that people are saying, yeah, but I mean, look at how many years that these things have been published, and you can't adhere to every single little detail. That's possible in some books, and others tend to struggle more. I mean, obviously, if you're talking about something like Batman, Spider-Man, and the X-Men that have had like 50 to 80 years of continuous publication, and they've had a million different titles, are you going to be able to get every detail exactly right? Is everybody, can a writer reasonably be expected to have read everything? No, obviously not, when we're talking about that. But you can understand the basic track of a character's life. You can understand, the basic thrust of what happened. You can certainly understand recent events, and you don't need to necessarily reference every little thing that you know. You can certainly reference the important things that matter, try to be up on what they've done recently, and try to make things fit as much as possible. That's certainly doable, and it's possible to do it in a way that's accessible. I would say the main things to watch out for are things like what happened in Spider-Man recently, which needed to be done. I don't blame Nick Spencer at all for essentially deciding to retcon a lot of the 2000s era Spider-Man books and those particular stories, because a lot of them were harmful to the larger narrative of Peter Parker. Certainly, One More Day was. Certainly, since Past was. So I don't blame him for doing that. I completely understand why he did that. I think the thing that you have to fault for, though, and I can understand why people have this problem, is that everything is so complex and convoluted that it's hard to get into. That is, I would say, definitely something where the writer has to watch out for that. So that is like the other, extreme. So as much as I am very much for continuity and all that, it has to be accessible to, not just your current audience, but like people who are lapsed readers, people who haven't read around for a while, and people who are just starting. So you want to make sure that your books is accessible to those kinds of people. I try to do that for all of my comics. Certainly for something like a Guardians of the Lamb, which is very much involved in Omenverse history. And so what I want to do is like make the current situation understandable. Do you know why the characters are there and what they're trying to do and why they're involved with this? Do you know who this character or that character is? I try to make it so that if you know who they are from some other book, that's great. I'm not necessarily going to require you to have done that, because I think Stan Lee had it right. I think every comic is someone's first, and so you want to make sure that you're watching out for that. At the same time, it's like I definitely have guidelines that I have to hit in terms of being able to represent the Omenverse in a way that is consistent with what Mike Nunnally has laid out. That's part of my job as a writer, is that his vision is on the page. And there are definite things he wants to do with the larger picture of the Omenverse and with a larger picture of a book like Guardians or a book like White Druid. So I need to make sure, obviously Lou is a character, Lou O'Shea is a character that is in common between those books. And so I have to make sure that the character is recognizable in both, that he comes across as the same character from both to people who have read both. At the same time, I don't want to require you to have read White Druid in order to understand his appearances in Guardians of the Lamb, or vice versa, which is actually more likely of a problem, because I treat the Lus from those books as slightly different characters, because one is from a different time period than the other. So that makes it both easier and more complex in a sense. So those are the kinds of things that I have to kind of balance around. Same thing with Colin, who is also going to appear in both books. So all of these things are things that you want to consider and you want to do effectively. At the same time, I think you can definitely balance both. I do not think that you have to sacrifice one or the other, and many books do both. If you look at something like Al Ewing's Immortal Hulk recently, or Chip Zdarsky's Daredevil, both of those, I mean, are long-running stories, dealing with long-running threads going back decades. A lot of what Al Ewing did in Immortal Hulk goes back to Peter David. A lot of what's going on in Daredevil goes, to previous runs like, Mark Waid's and Brian Bendis's and Frank Miller's and, all these sorts of little things, even things going back all the way to the beginning with Stan Lee. So, he's keeping in mind all these things, yet does anything contradict? No, not really. It's clear that Zdarsky's read the books that he's referencing. It's clear that he understands the emotional path of Matt Murdock from those early stories, into the runs that I talked about, into his current run. I mean, they all feel like they're the same character. I mean, that's really what you're aiming for. But do I feel like I have to have read like the early Mike Murdock stuff in order to understand what's going on in Zdarsky? No, not at all. It is a little trickier with Ewing and Immortal Hulk, but at the same time, if there's enough, I think, references made where if you're following the Ewing run from the beginning of that into the stories where he references the Peter David stuff, it's definitely understandable, what he's talking about with these alternate personalities that he references as an example, or with the leader. All of these things are done in a way that, you can definitely interpret it in a way that makes sense, without contradicting anything. And that's what I'm really looking for. Or even better, something like Astonishing X-Men in the first issues, where, I mean, it's decades of continuity being referenced, and yet it never feels like it's a history lesson. You don't want to feel like, okay, this is what happened way back then, and this is what happened now. There is none of that. It's just occasional flashbacks as needed, to hit the emotional notes, occasional mentions of things that happened before, subtly worked in. But it feels like it's part of the dialogue. It feels like it's part of what's going on. It doesn't feel like it's, something from ages ago that we're, doing a digression to info dump on you. That's what I'm kind of hoping for our books. That's what I'm hoping, for Blitz, which has backstory. That's what I'm hoping for with Guardians, which has references to White Druid. Those kinds of things. I do not want any of you to be lost. I don't want any of you to feel like, I am making the choice to sacrifice you as a reader, whatever side you may be on, whether you're somebody who's been an Omen off from the beginning, or whether you're somebody who's just trying the book now and seeing if this is for you. I want everyone to be represented as much as possible. And I don't think that that's asking too much from a writer standpoint. You can definitely be able to do that. And so I'm hoping that that's the experience that you'll get from our comics moving forward. So I think that covers everything for now. I hope that this gives you an idea of the thought process that we put into continuity and what the role of continuity is for us at Omen. So until next time, this is Steve with Omen Comics signing off.